Hi everyone, it's Frank from the Video Game History Foundation. We've just come back from the annual Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, where for the second year in a row, we built and hosted a history exhibit for the show called the Game History Gallery. I wanted to make a quick video for two reasons. One, we're really proud of this exhibit and we just wanted to show it off. But two, I thought this was a good opportunity to do a sort of post-mortem and gather my thoughts in terms of whether the foundation does this kind of work in the future. There's a link below to our video from last year, which explains our philosophies behind the Game History Gallery as a concept, but in short, we wanted to build something that's uniquely GDC. I've been going to GDC for 20 years, and for me, GDC is a space to get creatively inspired by conversations with peers. When we exhibit history at GDC, I want it to have a purpose. I want today's young creators to see themselves in the past rather than us leaning on the crutch of nostalgia. And I also want to remind everyone in attendance, all the creators at GDC, that their stories matter, that their work is important, and that they can be remembered through preservation. My biggest critique of our work last time around was that we didn't do a great job of explaining the concept, the theme behind the exhibit. So we tried to address that this year by not only being more explicit with what it is, but by giving the gallery a name. So this year's theme was very specifically about unreleased game software for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is a corner of video game history that I've been studying for 25 years. Sorry, something in my throat. We called the gallery Lost Levels, Unreleased Games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, a very direct name. The description's right there. And we reinforced the name and the theme over and over by putting it at the top of every sign. The theme of this gallery, Unreleased Games for the NES, really came from a place of necessity. We decided last year that it would be fun and a little bit subversive if we were to do another GDC gallery to exhibit unreleased games from throughout video game history, including before and after the NES. We thought it was, again, subversive given that most of those games only exist because people took their work home, possibly without permission, and it was a good way of teaching people that sometimes bending the rules is necessary for preserving history. Anyway, as the show got closer this year, we realized we weren't going to get the resources we needed to do that theme justice. It would have just taken too long to research that from scratch. So we switched gears to focus very specifically on unreleased games for the NES, given that, well, I'm a subject matter expert who's already done most of the research necessary for an exhibit like this. I keep talking about how I'm going to write a book. I don't know, maybe someday. This was maybe a rough draft. And when it came to actually naming the thing, I couldn't come up with a better name than Lost Levels, which was the name we came up with as a group for the website I helped launch in 2003 about unreleased games. This is actually a photo of me at Classic Gaming Expo 2003. You can see we're using the same name, Lost Levels. We even had one of the same games on display. I think it's just off camera on the right. That's Capcom's California Raisins, The Grape Escape, which also was at our GDC exhibit this year. So I'm either a broken record or I'm very committed to the bit. It felt a little weird as the exhibit came together to realize I was kind of building an exhibit about, I don't know, me, about my own career. But not really, you know, and I got over it pretty quickly, especially when I realized people were really grasping the theme on site and understanding why it was interesting. And actually, let me explain to you why unreleased games for the NES are interesting. There's an entire secret library of NES software that was completed and ready to go. I mean, the ROMs are done. Like, they often passed certification at Nintendo. The packaging illustrations were done. They started advertising them in magazines. Games that were done, that on average were just as good as the games that came out. These secret unreleased games number in at least the dozens, and might even get into the triple digits, 100 plus. And the reason is because back in those days, the riskiest part of the video game business, especially if you were a Nintendo licensee, was not the creation of the software like it would be today. It was actually in the manufacturing and fulfillment of the physical units, the cartridges and the packaging. These aren't real numbers that I'm going to give you, but they're more like educated estimates. It might have cost you about $100K to actually create a game back then, because teams were still small and development time was still relatively short. But when it came actually time to place your order, so the game's done, it's time to actually sign an order form with Nintendo to purchase units of your game, you might be writing a check for something more like $2 million. And you were probably waiting about 6 months after writing that check for your units to come in. So by the time you're ready to place that order, it might make more sense to just write off that $100K than it would be to risk $2 million in inventory on predicting what the market will want 6 months from now. So in a lot of cases, when it was time to make that decision, people did exactly that. They just shoved a game into the closet and said, we can't afford to actually publish this, no matter how good it might be. So, all of that's just a perfect recipe for really interesting lost software. A friend of mine, recently, when I described this to him, he said, oh, it's like UFO 50 is real. And it's like, yeah, it's literally like UFO 50 is real. There's just secret real NES games out there that are waiting to be found, and that's what I like doing. So anyway, for the NES, at this exhibit, we had 4 of these titles out for people to play. I wanted some diversity and representation, and the way we did this was I actually chose 4 games developed in 4 different countries that didn't come out in this country, even though they were supposed to. So there was the aforementioned California Raisins, which was made here in the US. VGHF favorite Super Sushi Pinball out of Japan. We actually did a video about that in 2023, which I encourage you to check out. Pyramids of Ra 2 out of the UK. And then finally, Buzz and Waldog out of Korea. We had a 5th game planned, Caltron 9-in-1 out of Taiwan, but ironically, we had to cancel those plans. Like last year, we also had a glass case filled with artifacts related to the theme. Most of this came from the VGHF's collection, with a couple minor exceptions. My favorite is this mock-up package by Parker Brothers for a New Kids on the Block game based on, the first boy band. We actually borrowed this from a collector friend, Josh Byerly. Thank you, Josh. As you might expect, we had a lot of prototype cartridges under glass that housed games that didn't come out here. We had a pretty small selection of actual development material, which I thought was cool, from programmer Chris Oberth. Now, if you've been following us for a while, you might recognize that name as the programmer who created the unreleased version of Days of Thunder that we managed to build from its source code off of his floppy disk backups. Those are actually the floppy disks that we got the game off of under glass. The notebook behind the discs is actually a game that maybe wasn't so lucky. Chris also did a darts game for the NES that used an actual physical dartboard, and that code was not found in his backups. We think it might be lost forever, and these notes might be all that remain of that project. And there was a lot of marketing material on display as well, which really reinforced what I wanted people to take away from this exhibit. These weren't weird prototypes necessarily. They weren't games canceled for quality reasons necessarily. These were real games. They just happened to have not been sold to anyone, and that's the only reason they're not part of the video game history canon. I just happened to be shooting some B-roll for this video when I caught these two older Japanese guys having a conversation about items in the case. If I see a guy with gray hair at my exhibit, I shuffle over instinctively. I am who I am. It turned out that the guy on the left was actually Hiroyuki Masano, a composer who worked at Kemco during the NES era. And he was explaining to his friend that he actually worked on two of the games that were represented in the case that never made it out in the US. So that was fun. We also used the backs of the kiosks to have larger signs explaining some core concepts around unreleased NES games. One of my favorite moments of the show was when I brought a developer from that era over to a sign I had created full of screenshots of games that are still lost, that are presumed dead. And I asked them if they had one that I pointed to on the sign that I knew they were tangentially involved in, and they said, "Oh yeah, I have that, I can send that over." As of this video, as of me recording this, that hasn't happened yet, but if we manage to surface an unreleased NES game out of doing this exhibit, I'm going to be really proud of that. Another feature people really loved was what I kept referring to as our war memorial, where I pasted in my personal list of 552 titles I've tracked in my research that were mentioned somewhere for the NES that didn't come out. A lot of these, truly are unreleased games. Some of them are prototypes that didn't get finished, but a lot of the other titles came out maybe under a different name, sometimes under a different publisher. Like one publisher would cancel it, another one would pick it up, but I tracked that anyway. But in a lot of cases, these names on this list were rumors or absolute nonsense or obvious mistakes that got published somewhere. I was surprised at just how many people at GDC walked up to the sign, bent down to the bottom because it's alphabetical, and looked for Yeah Beavis I, a nonsense text string that appeared exactly once in one mail order catalog. Obvious mistake, never seen again. It's not a real game, people, I promise. And of course, like last year, we had our Game Boy camera photo booth, where people could take home a souvenir photo print from the show in exchange for a donation, or if they were on our Patreon. We managed actually to raise a little over $2,000 just from photos, which was super cool. And we had a lot of return visitors from last year, which I really appreciated. A lot of people that I met last year because they took photos came back because they wanted the next one. Finally, I want to mention that we had an interactive kiosk exhibiting VGHF's digital archive, which we launched just a couple months ago at the end of January. It was really thrilling to randomly look over and see people having real conversations about video game history using our collection, looking things up and having discussions and really having a good time interacting with our collection live. I actually had another gray hair guy moment where I looked over to that kiosk and I saw someone looking up the name William Volk. William Volk is a programmer going back to the 80s, a name I happen to know. I know William Volk, but he's not someone that's famous, not generally well known outside of the history nerds. And I looked at the guy's badge and it was William Volk. And he actually, as far as I could tell, he was having a conversation with these younger people and he wanted to express something to them. And the way that he reinforced what he was talking about is that he brought them over and looked up an article that he had written like in the 80s for the Journal of Computer Game Design, and was having a conversation with them about that. And to see that, again, that happening in real life, like conversations happening because of our collection, I don't know, I can't really express how cool that is to me. We've been working on this thing for years, and seeing people actually using it in real life as opposed to tracking visitor information in our back-end dashboard, like, really made it real and really showed us what an impact we were making with this thing that we made. I've had a lot of people ask me, how was the show? How'd the show go? Are you going to do this again next year? And if you're asking me right now, I'm not sure if we're going to do this again next year. I don't want to drag this video down with like numbers or cost benefit analyses or anything like that, but creating an entire exhibit, even one like this where we already had built-in expertise, it's a pretty big ask for an organization with a head count of 2 full-time people. My job, my literal job, is to make sure that the VGHF as a charity is doing the most good it can in the world for the most people. And it's hard not to wonder if the 2 months or so that we spent in total between designing and building and displaying this exhibit could have had more of an impact if we did something else. Like if we spent that time filling in more material into the archive, or even, basement surfing through retired developers like I like to do. That said, it's also impossible to measure the impact that exhibiting at a show like this has on the future of the foundation. Opportunities could happen because we're there that I can't even conceive of. I can tell you as a fact that because we exhibited last year, a thought to be lost game ended up walking into our door from a local developer who had something to do with it. That's great. But more than all that, man, seeing our impact on actual human faces, like I talked about earlier, it's very energizing. Working as we do in this small office space, only really getting internet comments as our feedback, we tend to kind of forget how big of an impact we can have on real people. And so it's very energizing, and I'm thrilled we were able to do that. But I hate to sound like a cliche, but let me know in the comments, like literally, let me know in the comments what you think about this, because I've always considered the VGHF to be part of a larger game preservation ecosystem, and I really want to know what your thoughts are if you're a part of this game preservation community, and you might have some opinions on where we might spend our time. Anyway, that's all I got. Once again, I'm Frank Civaldi from the VGHF, and I'll see you next time.